The Edmonton Oilers and LA Kings meet for the third straight year in the playoffs, but what will it take for the Oilers to win this time? Plus, the Boston Bruins and the New York Rangers get off to solid starts in their respective series. It's playoff time, and we've got it covered for you here on the Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome, everybody, to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150. Win or lose, visit fanduel.com/lockedon to get started. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show a very familiar face and voice for Locked On NHL fans, Nick Zararis, who is now covering the Edmonton Oilers for us. And Nick, third straight year, it's Oilers Kings. What does it mean when these two teams face each other 3 straight years for the intensity and the rivalry that's created in a series like this?
It's been weird because you go back and look at some of these series. LA has won game one, both of the first two both series, the last 2 times they've played. One of them in overtime. One of them, the Oilers had a lead in the second period, and then the Kings scored 3 straight goals. And then as the series has progressed, there's been that natural cat and mouse game where the Kings are pretty structured, they're pretty well disciplined, and the Oilers use their speed to kind of break that down over the course of a series. And that back and forth, it's really interesting because that's typically how you're going to go about slowing down a more talented and a faster team. You're going to stick to your structure and you're going to try and force that other team to slow it down. And there's got to be real animosity at this point that 3 straight years, the Kings have played reasonably well in some of these series where I don't know if I would say they deserve to win, but they were right there. I mean, you forced a game 7 last year, a little bit more separation between the two, but this year the Kings had a very up and down season. The Oilers came out of the gate about as cold as you possibly can, and then the Oilers were the best team in the league once they switched their coach. So there's a lot of underlying stuff that makes this really interesting, and I can't wait to see how the first game kind of plays out, how they feel each other out. That's the best part of a game one, where the two teams come out and you want to see if they're going to be pedal to the metal or if they're both going to show a little trepidation and kind of ease their way into the game.
Yeah, should be interesting. You talked about the structure. What is your biggest concern from an Oilers perspective when facing the Kings?
The secondary scoring for the Oilers. The Kings are a deeper team. If you go player by player, forwards and defense, the Kings have more guys. You know, this is a team that was playing putting Byfield on their 4th line at points in April. This is a team that's played Pierre-Luc Dubois on their 3rd and 4th line for large stretches of the season. Those guys are just better than who the Oilers have in their 3rd and 4th line spots. So the depth is really going to be the key. And as far as what worries me, if the Oilers decide to load up and put McDavid and Draisaitl on one line, where's the rest of the offense going to come from? Because those 2 guys are going to do their jobs. I mean, over the last 2 years, they have 44 points in 13 games against the Kings in the playoffs. They're otherworldly, but they do need a little help, whether it's Nugent Hopkins, whether it's Zach Hyman, if Evander Kane is healthy and draws in, or maybe it's somebody a little bit more unexpected, like maybe it's Corey Perry, maybe it's Dylan Holloway. They're going to need somebody else other than McDavid and Draisaitl to score a goal at some point in this series.
Any updates on Evander Kane and his status heading in?
He's probably going to be a game time decision. The Oilers have been very obtuse about revealing what he's dealing with. They've just disclosed he hasn't been able to play or practice. They haven't said if it's upper body, lower body, if it's sick, just that he's day to day. He might play, he might not play.
As far as the finish to the season, I mean, the Oilers struggled a little bit down the stretch. Was this just sort of taking your foot off the gas because there was nothing important to play for the last few games, or is it a concern?
I think it's a little of both. I think both can be true simultaneously. Anytime you're not playing and you're sitting out a game, it's going to be you're going to have that little bit of adjustment period. Hockey's a little bit different than the other sports where if you sit for a day, even if it's just a meaningless game, the reps in a game are always going to be more difficult than the reps that are in practice. So even if you're a good player, playing in the game helps. It keeps you at game speed. So I do think some of it is that they had nothing to play for. They were locked into that 2 spot pretty early on in the month of April. But at the same time, you can be a little worried about how they played. You know, that the effort they had against Arizona was not great. The last game of the season, the effort there was not great, but they didn't dress everybody. The intensity wasn't there. There was nothing to play for. So both can be true.
So give me a name. You mentioned that, secondary scoring is going to be important. Give me a player in the bottom 6 forwards or maybe on the bottom 2 pairs of defensemen who might step in and be a difference maker for the Oilers.
My hope, and I know a lot of Oilers fans' hope, is that they give Dylan Holloway a little bit of run. A first-round pick from a couple years ago. Hasn't played a whole lot. He's 10, 11 minutes a game. He's got some of that high-end offensive skill you would like to see from a first-round pick. But being that the Oilers are such a veteran-laden team, being that their expectations are so high, they're not as inclined to give a young guy an opportunity to kind of figure it out as the season develops. I would think him. I really liked the Adam Henrique edition. He hasn't put up a ton of counting stats since he's arrived in Edmonton, but I could see him chipping in with a timely goal somewhere along the line here, especially if the Oilers try and separate all of their high-end guys from each other, where if Henrique is riding shotgun with one of McDavid or Draisaitl, and then you can throw Nugent Hopkins with one of them and Hyman with one of them and Evander Kane with one of them and kind of diversify where you're getting your offense from across 2 lines, that makes the Oilers a lot more dangerous. I think conceptually, I think the ideal outcome for Oilers fans and the Oilers in this series is McDavid and Draisaitl play well enough separate from each other that you have 2 lines going at all times. And then you can effectively have at least one of those 2 on the ice. I want to say close to a third, if not half of the game, if you separate them from each other. And then you're really going to be able to control the game when you have that level of talent and you can separate it from each other.
Yeah, that does make sense. Talk to me about the goaltending situation. I kind of wonder whether or not Stuart Skinner gets enough credit. How do you think he will do in this series, and how important is his performance?
I think he's probably the single biggest way the Kings hang around in the series. When you're talking about how a team pulls off the upset, they're typically going to need their goalie to steal a game, or they're going to need at least one win in overtime. In this case, you get Skinner a little flustered, the goals start coming in. He's been really good. Since they changed coaches, since the defense tightened up, he's been really good. I want to say the thing I was reading in The Athletic this morning, like a .916 save percentage since they switched from Woodcroft to Knobloch. So the defense has been a little bit better. His workload has been a little bit less challenging, so he's been able to play better. But you don't know. These games are very compressed. We're talking about 7 games maximum over the course of 2 weeks. Weird things happen. Jack Campbell had better stats in the playoffs than Stuart Skinner last year, and he only came in relief of blowouts. So Skinner is the type of guy where I believe he's capable of playing at a reasonably high level, but until he does it in the playoffs, you're going to always have that little bit of hesitation.
Totally understandable. Your prediction for the series and why it's going to be that way.
I've picked Oilers in 6. I feel the talent disparity at the top of the lineup is really what separates them. That's been the case in the postseason the last 2 times. I mean, Draisaitl had 12 points on one leg 2 years ago with a partially torn ACL and really kind of swung that series. The Kings, they're not as deep as they've been in years past. I know I said before they're a deeper team than the Oilers, but when you trade 3 guys for Dubois, you have to get rid of Sean Druzy as a cap casualty. They have a talented group. There are other matchups in the West. I feel I would have been more inclined to take the Kings, but we've seen this. We've seen how high-end talent teams like the Oilers with speed and skill typically fare against these slow, plodding teams that kind of want to grind it out. The Kings will win a couple of games in this series. They definitely can make it hairy, but I think the talent disparity at the top of the lineup is just too much for this Kings team. The goaltending situation in LA too. Cam Talbot has been very hot and cold. I mean, he almost blew that game against the Blackhawks, the last game of the season, where he gave up 3 goals on 4 shots in about 4.5 minutes of that game. So the Oilers have enough talent to pull away. It's simply just a matter of, do the Kings steal 2 or 3 games?
All right, Nick, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Yeah, having a very fun time as the interim host of Locked On Oilers. Me and Chris Knobloch both hopefully going to be holding our interim titles to the middle of June. Wherever you get your podcast, make sure you're subscribed. And over on Twitter, my handle is just my name, at Nick Zararis, Nick, Zararis.
All right, Nick, thanks so much, and good luck in the playoffs.
Same to you.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. You can bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. So check out the odds and prop bets for your favorite NHL team as the Stanley Cup playoffs continue. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Today's episode is brought to you by Policy Genius. Policy Genius is the country's leading online insurance marketplace. It saves you time and money so you can provide your family with a financial safety net starting today. With Policy Genius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million worth of coverage, and some options offer same-day approval and avoid unnecessary medical exams. Policy Genius helps you compare your options from top companies, and their team of licensed experts is on hand to help talk you through it. Talk to a team of award-winning agents who will walk you through the process step by step. It's easy to compare quotes from America's top insurers in just a few clicks so you could find the lowest price. Check life insurance off your to-do list in no time with Policy Genius. Head to policygenius.com/lockedonnhl or click on the link in the description to get your free life insurance quotes and see how much you could save. That's policygenius.com/lockedonnhl. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Boston Bruins, Ian McLaren. And Ian, you and the Bruins have got to be very pleased with the outcome of Game 1. What was the biggest difference in that seemingly one-sided victory?
I mean, the biggest difference is one of the strengths for the Bruins all season long, and that was goaltending. There was some question as to who would start Game 1, as the Bruins have been rotating goalies all season long. Linus Ullmark kind of outplayed Jeremy Swayman down the stretch post-trade deadline, but Jeremy Swayman had been excellent against Toronto all season long. He got the start in Game 1, and he was excellent in net, stopping 35 of 36 shots against, and yeah, really helped to, and that's what the Maple Leafs playing without William Nylander as well. They were still able to generate a bunch of shots, but the Bruins were able to keep them at bay thanks to Jeremy Swayman, and they were able to take advantage of some leaky goaltending at the other end of the ice. I was saying coming into this series, that was going to be one of the big differentiators between these two teams. I kind of joked on social media that neither team had announced a Game 1 starter, and that's because Boston had 2 number 1 goalies, and the Leafs didn't even have one, perhaps, and that proved to be true in Game 1 for sure. That was the big differentiator.
What do you see the Bruins doing going forward? Are they going to continue to alternate? Do they ride the hot hand in Swayman?
That's a big question, and it's still a bit unclear. General manager Don Sweeney said they had a plan coming into the playoffs. Didn't reveal that, of course, but whether it is to the huge debate right up until puck drop for Game 2 will be whether or not to stick with the hot hand in Jeremy Swayman or to stick with what worked all through the regular season, and that is pretty much a game-to-game rotation between Swayman and Ullmark. I'm of the mind that you stay with Swayman, especially since how he has owned Toronto back through the regular season as well. But there's something to be said for mixing it up and sticking with that rotation. My idea for the rotation in the playoffs was you start one guy, and at the earliest sign of trouble, you don't hesitate to go with the next guy. So that's kind of how I see it. As long as Swayman is performing, winning, then I say you stick with them. But if the Leafs get a bunch early in game 2, or they're able to win game 2, go back to Linus Ullmark for game 3 and see how that works out. So again, I think it'll be Swayman, but we won't know probably right until warm-ups when the first goalie comes on the ice.
Talk to me about the importance of the power play in game 1, and then the 2 goals, obviously, with the man advantage by Jake DeBrusk.
Yeah, huge. That has been a real struggle for the Bruins over the past couple of months, finding balance between the two units. The unit that was successful in game 2 was actually the quote unquote second unit for this group at the moment. On the first unit, you had guys like Pat Maroon, Kevin Shattenkirk, but it was the second unit with Charlie McAvoy, Brad Marchand, Jake DeBrusk that really exploded. And you had Jake DeBrusk, who has a reputation for coming up big against the Maple Leafs in the playoffs, scoring 2 goals. He, too, had been pretty quiet over the past several weeks. So it's huge for his confidence, huge for the power play confidence in general, taking advantage of some of those. Yeah, a lot of the talk for the Maple Leafs was how they added all this grit in Ryan Reeves, Max Domi, Tyler Bertuzzi, but it kind of came back to bite them in game 1 on the opening goal. You had Ryan Reeves jumping in as the extra man, hitting a guy and leaving the Bruins for a 2-on-1. You had Max Domi taking a bad slashing penalty against Brad Marchand, and he was called out by Coach Sheldon Keefe for that. So as long as the Bruins can continue to get under Toronto's skid and get the advantage in terms of power play time and taking advantage of those opportunities as well, then it should be a bonus for the Bruins for sure.
You mentioned 2 things. You mentioned Pat Maroon earlier. You mentioned getting under the Maple Leafs skin. What impact has he had on this team since his acquisition?
I mean, yeah, he's only played a few games up to this point, but he was very much a presence in game 1, setting the tone by sending Leafs defenseman Timothy Liljegren into the Bruins bench. And yeah, he's just there was a couple of times where there was some scrums after the whistle, and you could see him just kind of smiling at the Leafs who are trying to get under his skin. He's been there. He knows how to succeed in the playoffs. He knows how to toe that line. And I mean, if you had told me 5 years ago that the Bruins would be embracing Pat Maroon, it would be, I wouldn't believe myself, but here we are. He's becoming a fan favorite already. You can tell his experience is rubbing off on the team, and yeah, he's not going to play a huge role in terms of offense or driving possession or anything like that, but he's certainly going to make an impact when he's on the ice. And like I mentioned, he is getting some power play time as a net front presence. So who knows? Maybe he'll be able to pop 1 or 2 in here.
How do you slow down the Maple Leafs over a series like this? I mean, so many weapons on that team, especially at the top of the lineup. What's the strategy, and how well did it work considering how many shots on goal they had in game 1?
Yeah, I mean, it worked out all right. They did have probably Toronto's best opportunity. Didn't even count as a shot on goal because Auston Matthews had a wide open cage from a sharp angle and hit the post on that one. That could have been a turning point in the game. I think it was only 1-0 or 2-1 at that point. William Nylander wasn't in the lineup. It was really, they did have a lot of shots, but Jeremy Swayman was really able to cut down on any rebounds, and they weren't necessarily the highest danger chances. You didn't have to make necessarily a ton of difficult saves or stand on his head. So the Bruins are relying heavily on Charlie McAvoy, Hampus Lindholm, Brandon Carlo to shut these guys down. And funny enough, it was Brandon Carlo who not only helped shut them down, but he also got what stood as the game-winning goal as well. So, yeah, as long as they can keep them kind of to the outside and limit Auston Matthews specifically, keep him off the board, then the Bruins, should be all right.
And any other keys to victory for this series that you wanted to set forth right now?
Yeah, I mean, in game one, secondary scoring was huge. That was a key for me coming into the series. Goaltending, we didn't see David Pastrnak really pop up in this one. I think that is a key. Obviously, he can't stay off the board for a whole series and the Bruins win. So I expect a pretty big game for him coming up. Face-offs were a big concern for me as well. The Bruins had not been a good face-off team, but they did recall John Beecher, who was their second best face-off guy when he played in the regular season. And I believe the Bruins did have the advantage in the face-off dot, and Beecher opened the scoring as well. So, I mean, you couldn't have scripted a better game one for the Bruins. I still expect it will be a long series, far from over, but so far, so very good for the Bruins.
All right, Ian, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Yeah, Locked On Boston Bruins, available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. And people can find the podcast on social media at Locked NHL Bruins. And they can find me at Ian C. McLaren.
All right, Ian, thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, no problem, Gil.
Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. Look, and they've also got flash deals that can help you save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or the event. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Everybody, to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. It is great to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On New York Rangers, John Chick. And John, you got to be pretty happy with what you saw on the ice in game one from the New York Rangers.
Yeah, overall, very encouraging. I think if you're kind of drawing up a blueprint for how the Rangers will win game one, I think it would be pretty similar to this. I mean, it wasn't the most lopsided score you'll ever see, but one of those games where it just felt like the Rangers were mostly in control. Obviously, they had that barrage of 3 goals in just over 2 minutes in the second period there, and that's tremendously encouraging because one thing that the Rangers had really struggled at this season, and they've been better recently, but they have been, for a team as good as they are, with the best record in the NHL, just abysmal in the shift that follows a goal, or maybe not necessarily the following shift, but the next minute or two, whatever it might be. So to see them just explode for those 3 goals there, see the fourth line get involved, it was awesome. I feel like it's one of those games where everybody did at least a little bit to help the team win, and I don't think anybody had a bad game on the team. And obviously, there's still a long way to go here. That was just game one, but as far as an encouraging game one performance, I think that was it right there.
Talk to me about the fourth line. You mentioned they were involved, scoring a couple of goals and really playing well. Even Matt Rempe getting on the scoreboard with a goal. What made them so effective in game one?
They just go out there and go to work. I think that's where it begins. When you watch that first goal that they scored, I mean, I was thinking about this when it happened. Like, that's the kind of goal that, like, if a first line scores a goal like that, it's very impressive. They zip in there on the rush. They do a great job, keeping the puck away from any kind of defenders. A couple of nice passes, guys under duress making good passes. And, Matt Rempe's there on the doorstep, and he finishes. And, Rempe, I mean, he's kind of a lightning rod. We know that, both for Ranger fans and fans of other teams who might not like him very much. But he's one of those guys, like, I really don't think he's a one-trick pony. Everybody just kind of sees him as the guy that goes out there and fights, and he's the goon and this and that. He's got better speed than people realize for a big player. And he's one of those guys, he can set up shop in front of the net. And if he doesn't want to move, I mean, good luck moving Matt Rempe out of there. So I honestly think, like, at one time or another in his career, he might get around like 20 points a season. It's not going to be like point per game or anything ridiculous like that. And of course, he doesn't have a ton of ice time to work with, and he's going to mostly be on the fourth line. But I don't think that's an unattainable, like, kind of milestone for him. And for the other guys, I mean, Jimmy Vesey's one of those guys that just busts his tail every single game. And Barclay Goodrow, you got to feel happy for him, because he's one of those guys that does come under fire from Ranger fans from time to time. They see his salary. I think it's like $3.6 million. And it's like, oh, he's a fourth liner. He never scores and this and that. And it's like, that guy puts his hard hat on every night. And nice to see him get rewarded with a multi-point game. I'm pretty sure he had 2 assists in this game, in game 1 of the playoffs. So just great stuff all around from that fourth line. And again, one of many reasons why I think this is a very encouraging win for the Rangers.
What did you see out there in game 1 that maybe has you a little bit concerned?
There wasn't anything too concerning, I wouldn't say. I mean, I thought, physically, the Rangers were right there with them. I haven't checked the stats as far as like hits and whatnot, but I guess, a couple of the things coming into the series, if there was anything I could look at and, kind of point to, and okay, maybe that might be a little bit of an issue. Physicality, although the Rangers' physicality is very underrated. I've been saying that on my show all year. I just think that the Caps, give them credit. They battled their way into the playoffs despite being a team that sold at the trade deadline, and they're here and they earn their spot just like everybody else. But I feel like, from an offensive perspective, they're not on the same level as the Rangers. So one thing that kind of concerns me is, like, at what point are the Caps going to try to, like, kind of drag the Rangers down into the mud and just make this an absolute slog of a series? I think that's probably their best chance. We'll see if they kind of go with that kind of an approach in game 2. And the other thing that gave me some worry too was Charlie Lindgren was hot down the stretch. And I felt like he's kind of an underrated goalie in the first place. But to see the Rangers beat him clean a couple of times, that was very encouraging too. The goals that the Rangers were scoring, they were legit. I mean, these were not like lucky bounces or impossible to stop deflections. They beat him clean a couple of times, and that kind of alleviated, some of my concerns. He's still a very good goalie. He made some good saves in this game. He'll make some good saves the rest of the way too. But I think the Rangers can get the puck by him. I think they showed that here today.
How about Igor Shesterkin? Your thoughts on him, and how important is his play going to be if the Rangers are going to go on this long playoff run that everybody expects them to do?
Yeah, he was good today. I mean, you'll see other games where he'll make a few more highlight reel saves than maybe he had in this one, but he did make some tough saves and cool under pressure. There were a couple of times where after the Caps got one back, they started spending a little more time in the Ranger zone. They got a power play not too long after that, and Igor was up to the task, making timely saves when you really need them and not letting the Caps back into the game. That was encouraging. And as far as how important he's going to be, I mean, he's going to be huge. I always feel like, there's some debate on this too, and maybe this is a different topic for a different day, Gil, but, there's some debate about, well, you just need like an average goalie and you play good defense around him. I always think that the goalie really makes the difference. And, with Igor Shesterkin, there's a lot of great goalies in this league. If the Rangers are in a playoff series, I don't think I'm ever going to look at the other side of the ice and think that guy's better than Igor, and there might be some guys that are evenly matched with him, and, we'll see. And again, Charlie Lindgren is no slouch. I really do think he's a good goalie. But again, that's just an area where I feel like the Rangers are always going to have the edge, and hopefully that makes a big difference as we continue on in the playoffs here.
The President's Trophy, as we know, has not been a guarantee of Stanley Cup playoff success. How do you think the Rangers are handling just the pressure that goes along with being number one in the league during the regular season?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked me that, man, because, the Rangers 2 years ago, they had that improbable run to the conference final, and nobody really saw that coming. Even I didn't think they'd make it that far going into the season. But I feel like back then, they were such a young team, and some of these guys in the playoffs for the first time, it felt like they were more comfortable kind of playing the underdog role. And we saw that. They went down 3-1 to Pittsburgh, came back and won it. They went down 2-0 to the Canes, came back and won it. They got up 2-0 against the Lightning, and it's like they didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to handle, kind of having that edge and that advantage. And I feel like lately, especially under Laviolette, they've gotten more comfortable with that idea that, no, we are one of the absolute best teams in this league, and we are the big dog in the yard now. And I think that's going to be huge for them. They have to keep that mindset. And, again, ton of respect to every team in the playoffs. Getting in alone is not an easy thing to do. And as we've seen in the history of the Stanley Cup playoffs, anybody can beat anybody. But, the Rangers, I do think they're one of the best teams in this league. The record proves that. And if they can keep doing what they're doing, I think it's looking pretty good.
So give me, 2 or 3 keys that you think are most important for the Rangers to go on this long playoff run.
Well, if the refereeing is going to be anything like it was today, there were some ticky-tack penalties called in this game. But then later in the game, they weren't calling things that seemed kind of obvious that should have been called. And for the record, I'm saying this both ways. I'm not saying like the refs are out to get the Rangers or anything like that. But Rangers have a huge penalty kill. They've done a great job all season. They've been especially good down the stretch. And if it's going to be like this, if there's going to be penalties called every couple of minutes, then that's obviously going to be a huge unit for the Rangers for them to go out there and get it done. And I think just that ability also to roll 4 lines, we saw that in this game. We talked about this a minute ago, but I don't think anybody on the Rangers really had a poor showing in this game. And obviously the 4th line, they're not going to get 2 goals every game, but they played very well even outside of that. The Wenberg line, Wenberg, Cooley, Kakko, that's the 3rd line. I thought they looked really good in this game too. So having that depth is huge. You can't always rely on just one line to get it done. And, again, I thought every line played well, and that's encouraging as well.
John, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Yeah, so wherever you're listening to this or watching this, you can find Locked On Rangers there too. We're on YouTube. We are also on every audio streaming platform that you can possibly think of. And as far as following me on social media, you go on Twitter at jcheck17. And I was pretty active during the game today, and I'll try to be for the rest of the playoffs as well.
All right, John, thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, Gil. Good talking some hockey.
Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. I want to thank my guests today. I want to thank Nick Zararis of Locked On Oilers, Ian McLaren of Locked On Boston Bruins, and John Chick of Locked On New York Rangers. I'm Gil Martin. I host the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, and I co-host the Friday edition along with Rachel Donner. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Remember, we are here every day, Monday through Friday, throughout the playoffs, the Stanley Cup Finals, and all off-season long, bringing you the biggest stories from around the league. So make sure you join us for that. Have a great day, everybody. Stay safe, and thanks for listening to and watching the Locked On NHL podcast.